Welcome, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our second webinar of the year. I'll give people a few seconds to come in and join us, and then we will get started. I don't know where you're joining me from. If you're joining me from the US or outside of the US, so I don't know what time zone you're in, but I want to welcome you to our webinar today, which is Communication Skills. Communication skills in the age of disruption. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on what we hope will be a timely topic, given everything that's happening in the world. We want to talk to you about communication skills in the age of disruption. And what I will do is I will go through our agenda so that we can set the stage of what to expect from this webinar. And then we will dive right in. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the landscape. What's going on a macro level? What are the things that are impacting our world? And of course, how we work, because we're all here as employees, people looking for work, looking to transition careers. And how do all of these changes impact? Why do they matter? And then, of course, we're going to get a little bit more granular in terms of digital overload, because we know we have a lot of information today and a lot of tools we can use. And what does that mean? How has that impacted us? And then these changes, I hope, are begging questions or generating questions for you. I know that it's generated questions for me in terms of what are the skill sets for the future? What are skills that I can learn for the future as we think about all of these changes? What are some of the skills that I can use today and I can improve? Are there such skills? I mean, there's so much information out there that makes you think my job is going obsolete. But I want to assure you that there are skills today that just have longevity, and we're going to talk about one of them today. And then communication skills, which is the enduring skill we will talk about. How do we use that better? How can we improve how we communicate with our colleagues, with external customers, with leadership team, with recruiters, with people with whom we want to network? How do we choose the right channel for the right audience? And then we'll talk a little bit about the common mistakes we make when we're communicating. And then, of course, practical tips, because at the end of the day, we want to walk away with some actionable items that we can take away to our work, to our roles in our organizations, and we can practice and get better at doing them. So with that, I'm going to start laying the groundwork of what's happening in the world. Now, a lot of these things are not new, what I'm telling you. You certainly hear about them in the news. And so I won't spend too much time on them, but I think it's worth considering. One thing we know is that change is constant. So we know that. We know that the world's always changing, and hopefully we're changing and we're evolving with the world. But right now, what we're experiencing, I think, are transformative changes and shifts that are happening simultaneously. So, I mean, if you think about history and you think about the Industrial Revolution, these things were not happening at the same time. And yet today we are faced with factors that are impactful and all simultaneously. So we'll start with geopolitical shifts. The US has been a very dominant player in the world, and we've had old alliances like NATO that are being questioned, that are being redefined. We have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, forming a new alliance, strengthening that alliance. What does that mean for that alliance and how it impacts the rest of the world? We have a lot more economic volatility. So do we have a recession? We're going into a recession. We've had a lot of supply chain issues that were impact of the pandemic. So a tremendous amount of volatility. We have inflation. We have, volatility in the stock markets across the world. And then we have a huge change in demographics. as you look at the world, we know that in the developing world, there is a declining birth rate and an increase of people who are over 65. And actually, the segment over 65 is the fastest growing segment in the world. So that poses questions in terms of how do we engage this population, healthcare. In the workplaces, do we want to engage this population? People maybe don't want to retire early anymore. They want to work longer and be productive and have purpose. So how do we engage those populations in our work? And then, of course, the star of the year since 2023 has been generative AI. And of course, we have a lot of press and media about this. Some of it is, will this change our jobs permanently? Will some of those jobs go completely obsolete? Will we become co-creators with generative AI? I mean, so many questions, and some of them we don't know the answers. We have higher education institutions, public and private institutions. We have corporations trying to answer these questions. So these are not questions that we're expected to answer, thankfully, but there's certainly questions that impact how we do our work. And so that moves us to how we work, the working models. Some of us grew up in a working model where we were going to the office every day. Some of us already were used to working in hybrid models where you spent some time in the office and sometimes you worked from home. But the pandemic shifted all of that. And now people are much more comfortable working from home and want to. So there's lots of debate going on. Jamie Dimon and lots of the CEOs in the financial industry have very strong opinions about how people should be working and how many days in the office. Again, we may not be able to impact those decisions, but that is also happening and disrupting the way we work, or at least changing it. And then we have just technology, not just generative AI. We've had digitization and data. And, we are now being asked to learn new skills around analytics, becoming more data literate. And this is happening across jobs, across sectors and industries, across functions. So lots of changes going on in the world at large. And at the same time, technical here. And at the same time, we are being asked to use all of these new tools at work. I mean, we have just digital overload, information coming in from all angles, email and Zoom and Slack and, Confluence and Trello, all of these things that we're expected to master and use at work. And rather than making our jobs easier, they're taking away from our work. Microsoft does a study every year called the Work Trend Index, and this is the results of their study for 2023. On average, employees are spending 84 minutes a day just looking for information to get their work done. So that's over an hour of your day before you even get started, just thinking about, well, where's the information I need to get my work done? Then another 57 minutes just switching between tools, just going from email to Zoom, from Zoom to Slack. That is wasting 57 minutes. And then you add another 30 minutes deciding, well, what tool am I supposed to use and what tool do I use when? So that all of that overload is taking away time from the creativity and innovation work where, that companies really need from us. And so just when you start your day, you're already losing about 2.5 hours of work. So that's a pretty massive change. And so with all of these changes, it begs a lot of questions. It's begging questions of me all the time in terms of, where should I put my focus? What are the things I should be learning? Should I get really good at Slack? Where should I put my focus if I want to make my career better, if I want to have more opportunities? So I'm going to share a couple of more things that are more positive, where I think that if we invest our time, they will provide the most return. So this was a study done by the Burning Glass Institute, which does a lot of research on the future of work. And part of the study was really looking at the skills of the future mostly looking at the technical side. So they were looking at the side, what technical skills do we, in the context of automation and all of that, what are the skills that we need? And in that report, they also discussed the skills that have longevity, the skills that are foundational, and more importantly, they can be improved. So they have longevity and they have a high return. And those skills are communication, teamwork, writing, which is part of communications, public relations, critical thinking, and problem solving. So today's webinar, we're not going to discuss all of them. I decided to just choose one. And I chose this because it's a low effort, high return if we work to improve it. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about the importance of communications. I mean, if you go online, there are millions of articles on communications and what does it do for us. But here are just some statistics to really validate the importance of communications for you in your career, as you manage and navigate your career, but also as you think about looking for a new job, getting a promotion. These are really important things. So in 2022, LinkedIn Learning did a survey, and the report found out that 75% of hiring managers rated communication as their top skill for new hires. So we're all worried about having the technical parts of our job and doing that well and presenting that in an interview. But imagine that communication was one of the key drivers of that decision. So let that kind of seep in there. Then you have business leaders saying, 80% of business leaders saying that poor communication skills cost companies millions of dollars. And we can certainly think of examples of really bad PR out there that cost companies millions of dollars. Then another study found that 69% of promotions are based on communication skills. So lots of different reasons to focus on communication skills. And before we go into improving them, we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes people make in communication skills. So I'm going to actually open it up to you, and please use the Q&A and tell me what have been some of the mistakes that you've made, or if you just have an answer to the question on some of the common mistakes that you've seen. So I'm going to look at the Q&A and see if anyone is answering that question. Don't be shy. Okay, let's see. Not knowing your audience. Okay. Any other takers? Anyone else want to say anything? Speed gap, not thinking ahead. Okay, great. Not listening. Overeager to communicate a positive idea. Yes, overeagerness, yeah. Assumption that the person knows what you're talking about. Excellent. So yes, you've gotten most of them. We're going to go through them. Thank you so much for answering that question. So the most common mistakes as we're thinking about communication, which are, you've already said, is being unclear about what you want to say. What am I trying to communicate? Is this informational? Is this eliciting feedback? What is it that I'm trying to say? Targeting the wrong audience. I mean, we all know, and we've seen situations where you've gotten an email blast and you read through the email and you say, why was this email sent to me? Why is this important to me? I don't even know why I'm included in this email, Not providing enough context. So, if you have someone new on a project and you send an email without context, the person now has to take the time and read through all of the threads to try to even figure out what the context of this email or communication is. So providing context is one of the other things. Using inappropriate language. And I think this is an important one because we've all gotten so used to these short, informal communications, whether it's on texting or whether it's in collaboration tools. And we may think that being informal works in all situations, but we all know from being in the workforce and being in a work organization that informal versus formal is an important question to ask yourself, and using the appropriate language. Not actively listening, which the audience already talked about. Adopting the same tone and style across all channels, which is, I just referenced that. Do we want to adopt the same tone in a Slack message that we do in email, that we do in a leadership presentation, or that we do to a customer? Avoiding difficult conversations. So yes, most of the time, difficult conversations, we tend to avoid them. We don't want to do them, and we can ruin relationships when we do this at the workplace. Knowing how to have those difficult conversations is important, because you don't want to you don't want to impact your relationships, and on an organizational basis, it impacts morale if you don't communicate difficult things. And we've certainly seen lots of those examples in the layoffs in the last year, where CEOs have communicated via email, and just really have damaged their reputations and the morale of the company. And then, of course, over-reliance on online tools and avoiding face-to-face discussions. I think that we see this more and more, and people forgetting the value of face-to-face interactions. So those are some of the common mistakes, and now we're going to get into how do we improve all of this? What do we do with, okay, we have all these tools, we have all these channels, we know we need to improve communication skills. So how do we do that? So I think we start with a little bit about the channels, because we just have a plethora of options today. And it is really confusing to know sometimes how to use this channel. When is it appropriate to spend time in an email, or when is a face-to-face conversation the right thing to do? And the things I've put here are, they're not all encompassing. And what I would say is that, these channels, more often than not, you're using a combination of channels. If you're working on a large, complex project that involves a lot of people and different stakeholders, and you also have external stakeholders, then obviously it's going to be a much more complex decision as to who do you communicate and how and what channels you use. But on a personal level, as you're thinking about just your own communication in the workplace, whether it's with your colleagues or your manager or stakeholders or the senior leadership, we think about email, for example. Is email appropriate for lengthy conversations that are eliciting a lot of feedback? I would say probably not. Email is not a good use for that. It's also difficult to retone in an email. Sometimes people go overboard and start using exclamation points or all caps. Well, that's probably not an appropriate use of email. And if you are sitting and trying to write an email and you have an urge to put something in caps or a lot of exclamation points, you might want to ask yourself, is this the right way? And is this the right venue and channel for me to use as I'm communicating this message? Of course, there's face-to-face, and, is this better for relationship building? It's better for reading nonverbal cues. Collaboration tools, it's something more immediate and short, and you just want an answer. And then, of course, Zoom. I mean, we all are burnt out with Zoom, but it's still a really important channel. And Zoom is difficult. I think virtually is a little difficult, and it's become difficult because we're just so distracted. And it's difficult to read all of the nonverbal cues, because nonverbal cues are not just your face, it's your entire body and tone and other things. So in order to get really good at deciding, what is the appropriate channel, it's really important to understand intent and purpose. So if you understand why you're doing something, then it'll inform as to how you go about doing it. So what's the purpose of your communication? Is this informational? Is this, I'm just trying to keep someone in the loop? Is this building a business case? Are you trying to sell a new idea in a business? Are you trying to sell yourself? Is this for a job interview? Are you talking to a recruiter? So are you building a business case about why you are great for this job? Are you defending a position? Did you pitch a new idea and it wasn't received well? And so now you're going back and you're defending why you wanted this idea or you thought this idea was amazing. Managing up. This is an important one and a complex one in terms of purpose, because often we don't know if we're over including people, if we're including the right people. And so these are important things to understand when you're communicating. And are you asking for clarification? Is there a call for action to action for your communication? And as you think about the purpose, it naturally also helps you think about your audience. You know, who is this going to? Is this my manager? Is this only my manager and his immediate manager or her immediate manager? Are these my peers? And can my tone be more informal since it's my peers? Is this with an external customer? And I really need to be more thoughtful and careful about how I say things. Am I communicating the right information? Is this information confidential and shouldn't be shared? So, you know, communication is complex. And, you know, most of the time when we do this, we're answering these questions automatically. These are just tools for helping you be a little more intentional as you are communicating in the workplace and with the external customers and even with recruiters, hiring managers, as you do a job search. These questions also can help you improve, and these are questions from journalists. They use these 5 questions when they are developing a story. And one of the things around communications that is becoming even more important, and I want to kind of pause a little bit about this, because when we think about our career, communication skills actually become more important as you get more senior. And as you think about leading others and managing others and doing much more complex cross collaborations, or you're working with people in different time zones, or you're working with people in different countries, it is even more critical to know how to communicate and to tell stories and to know how to engage people and tell a story that excites people. This is important when you're selling an idea, when you're trying to get influence others. So the 5 questions are just: who's going to read this? Who is going to attend this? Who will care about this? What idea am I trying to convey? Why does it need to be said? You know, sometimes we over communicate, or we're including extraneous information in information that, you know, in communication that is not needed. So I think it's important to step back and say, well, why does it need to be said? Sometimes we'll say, okay, you know, that email didn't need to be sent. That could be a face-to-face conversation. That could be a Slack communication. I don't actually need to send that email. And then how will I communicate this? Which I just said, you know, if this is an important communication, okay, maybe this is a presentation. Maybe this is a formal presentation where I gather my peers and I gather my team, my outside team, or the other stakeholders that are outside your immediate team. And this has to be a little more formal. And then, you know, is there a frequency and a cadence? If this is a project, do I have to communicate on a weekly basis? Is this a one-time thing? If this is a networking, and we talk about this in networking a lot, that, you know, networking is a marathon. Is there a cadence and a frequency when you're doing networking outreach that you should have with those people? Can I communicate them 5 days after I've sent them the first email? What is the right cadence? So these questions really help inform you as you're trying to make all these communication decisions. And just like we use frameworks in almost every aspect of business, and even in interviewing, if all of you are familiar with STAR, situation, task, action, and results, we have some tools that we can use in communications. I'm not being, obviously, this is not all encompassing. These are just a couple of tools that I found that I thought would be very helpful to you. The first one is CLEAR, and it's concise, logical, empathetic, actionable, and relevant. So is my communication concise? Am I using 3 paragraphs when I should be using 1? So it's a good question to ask yourself. Am I being overly verbose? And this also is in face-to-face communication. Am I taking up the time of my audience when this could have been a 10-minute discussion and not a 1-hour discussion? Is it logical? Does it make sense? Am I covering the right points as I'm putting together this communication? Empathetic. Tone is a very difficult thing to read in most written communications. And sometimes we even lose that in face-to-face communications because there's just a lot going on when we're communicating with people face-to-face. And there's a lot of things that we're trying to read all at the same time. But tone is an important way to communicate warmth, to communicate interest. So, being empathetic in your communication, is it actionable? Is what I'm communicating actionable? And is it necessary that it's actionable? If it's just informational, then maybe it's not actionable, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be actionable, but these are just questions that you can ask yourself. And of course, is it relevant? As I mentioned before, sometimes we get email blast of information that is not relevant to us. It's not important to us. And are we really just overloading people's inboxes with information that is not necessarily, and it's not necessary and they don't need to know it? And then describe, which is just describe, express, suggest, and consequence. And so it's pretty similar to clear. It's just describe your situation in detail, express what you need to say clearly and concisely. Are you making a suggestion? Are you asking for feedback? Is it clarification? And is there a consequence? So those are just some frameworks that you can use. And so now I'm going to give you an example of a tailored communication, keeping the audience in mind. This is a coworker, and I would love for you to tell me what you think is wrong with this email. You can use the Q&A to do that. Okay, I think my audience has gone radio silent, so I will go ahead and talk about what's wrong with this email. Let's see, I had one person respond, a couple of people respond. Let's see. Yes, tone, language, inappropriate, all caps, excellent. Yes, those are all the things that are wrong with this email. Absolutely. So it's informal, it's impolite, the subject line is vague, the tone is demanding, it lacks politeness, and it lacks clarity. It just emphasizes urgency. So how can we improve it? So here I've taken the liberty of trying to improve it, and you'll see that it's a little less formal, but not so informal. Hey, Mike, or hi, Mike. I'm following up on the TPS project covering this period. And it's telling the person why this is important. It's important because we want to meet our deadlines. And can you please let me know if you can't do it and if you anticipate any delays? And if so, can you give me the time frame for completion? So you can see it's clear, it's concise, it's logical, it's actionable, it's relevant, it gives relevant information, and it's empathetic. So that's an example of how to improve your communications, and just think about your audience and what you're trying to say in terms of time, timeliness, context, conciseness. And I think it's worth talking about active listening, because this is something that we don't often practice, and yet it can be improved quite easily if we just are very intentional about it. And active listening is almost in every, we're using it on Zoom, we talk about virtual communications, we're talking about face-to-face when we're in the middle of a room when someone is presenting, or where there's a formal presentation. These are all skills we can improve. So one of them is just to minimize the level of distractions you have so that you can listen attentively. Turn off your devices, turn off notifications. I mean, we see this, people in business meetings that are on their phone. You see people in Zoom you see their eyes are in another place, they're not present. So as much as you can, be an active listener, because if you don't, you're going to lose out on a lot of things that maybe your colleagues are trying to share with you that are pertinent to the work you're trying to do, the promotion you're trying to get, the influence you're trying to elicit. Maintain good eye contact. You know, that's another one. Don't go staring off into space or stare too intently. Summarizing and paraphrasing. This is something that is really underused and undervalued, and I think could avoid a lot of confusion. So just paraphrasing what you heard. You know, did I hear you correctly? This is what I heard you say. This shows not only that you're interested in the topic and what the person is saying, is that you are actually listening. So avoid interrupting. You know, normally there's a cadence to a conversation. It's important to just pause and think, is this the time for me to interrupt? Is it okay for me to ask questions right now? I think in Zoom, this is a little more difficult, which is why Zoom has that raise your hand. And I know that there are norms across cultures, but those features are there for a reason so that we can avoid interrupting one another. And of course, just preparing accordingly. Always. Preparation is always the key. And a little bit about body language, because there's a statistic that says that more than 75% of what you communicate is actually done non-verbally. So imagine you walk into a room, and we've all heard the story that, you know, you walk into an interview and people make a decision within 30 seconds, which is not true, but I think it's 3 minutes, the actual statistic. But most of what you've communicated while you walked into that room is actually your body language, your facial expression. It was your body movement. It was the eye contact you made with the person who greeted you. It was the intensity in which you said it. Did you shake that person's hand and you almost broke it? What was the tone? Is it friendly? Is it warm? Timing. So as you think about body language, you're thinking about your body language and what you're communicating, but you're also reading the person in front of you. You're reading the people on your Zoom call. You're trying to read their facial expression. What is their face showing? Is it interest? Are they bored? Are they emotionally present? Is your body stiff? Are your arms crossed? So you shows that you're not really interested in listening. Eye contact. Are you making eye contact with your audience? Whether it's in a Zoom meeting, whether it's in a face-to-face discussion, whether it's with a presenter. And are you being intense? Are you being disinterested, or are you over the top? I mean, someone mentioned in the chat being over eager when you have a positive idea. Is there such a thing as being over eager? I guess depending on the situation, there is a case to be made for that. Then of course, tone. You know, am I projecting warmth? Am I projecting confidence, interest, or am I doing the opposite? Am I looking strained? And of course, timing. As I said, there's usually a cadence to discussions, whether it's a presentation or a face-to-face meeting or Zoom, and just really reading those cues, really stopping yourself and thinking about, you know, what am I reading? You know, there's a lot going on when you're communicating, and our brain is an incredible instrument that is doing this processing real time. And all I'm asking you to do is to slow down so that you are keeping these things in mind, keeping this in mind when you're communicating, and also trying to read those cues when others are communicating with you. And this is a chart from a research that was done. A couple of the tech remote-only companies have been doing a lot of research on the world of work, and because they're trying to figure out, well, how do we get people more engaged in creativity and collaboration? They've done all this research, and this is just one model of one of the outputs of that research. I think it was with AWS and Amazon and Atlassian. And this is a model that they were talking about, and they've been researching, you know, if the project is low bandwidth, like if this is just notifying people about changes, or it's just sharing updates, you know, is email the appropriate thing to use? Is it just text messaging, which we don't as much use at work? Is it just running a recurring task? Is it just an audio and video message? Or if the project is much more complex, or it involves a lot of stakeholders and people, if it's more creative, you know, what's the right way, the right tool to use? Is this really a face-to-face? Is this more a video conference? Is this a combination of all of them? And I would say that most of the time it's a combination, really depending on the complexity of the project. And also on the complexity of what we're trying to get accomplished. I mean, we may be working on something that's really complex and requires a lot of coordination. And so we will have to flex and think about, what are the tools that we use in all of this. So again, we go back to mindfulness, to being more intentional as we think about, how do we improve our communication skills? And here, we want to pause. We don't often use pause in communications. We want to get our point across. Someone's sharing a great idea and you just want to blurt out. It's a fantastic idea. We don't want to interrupt people's creative flow. So pausing and reflecting on what it is we're trying to accomplish. What are we trying to say? What are we trying to communicate here? If the communication is difficult, if you're managing a difficult client, or if you're new, or if you're a manager, or you're, managing a difficult situation, you might want to get feedback from others when you're writing. If you're writing, whether you're doing a presentation and you're communicating a difficult business problem, or you're just communicating bad news, you might want someone else to read it, to check on you and give you feedback on the tone of what you're using. If something has triggered you, if you're having a difficult situation at work and someone sent you an email that really upset you, try not to react, take a pause, go get coffee, go for a walk, and come back to that email, because maybe that walk has generated some ideas of how to respond to that communication. Leverage face-to-face communications when possible. Often, we have an email and it's confusing, or someone slacked us and we're not really sure what they meant, how they meant it, because of course we can't read tone in most of these tools. So better to go and pop into someone's office and say, can you please give me some feedback? Or I'm not really sure I understood what you were trying to say. I'm just asking for a little bit of clarification. And ask for input, as you write your emails or do your presentations. It's always great to get feedback. What could I have done better? Did I communicate that point great? And then, practice reading nonverbal cues. So I would say that, practicing these tools, it takes some effort, but not a high degree of effort, and it has a high return. And as I said at the beginning, the reason for practicing communication skills is because it really is important across the lifespan of your career. From early career to the senior, as you become more senior, communication skills get more complex and also just get more important. They just become more important. And it's important when you're looking for a job, when you're maintaining a job, when you're trying to get a promotion, improve your role, develop a new business idea. They're just important across the board. And so that's why today I wanted to take the time to really focus on how do we improve these communication skills. They are enduring, they have longevity, and they're foundational. So with that, I will open it up now for questions, if you have questions for me. Anything else? All right, don't be shy. I guess we have no questions. All right. Well, I think that was, I think we'll wrap up now. Okay, so I have one question from the audience. What is a good way to handle a confrontation? Okay, so depending on the nature of the confrontation, I mean, if this is happening live, obviously, it's a little more complicated, but I think pausing is definitely important if this is a situation that is live. I think it's okay in a business context, if you are having a confrontation, to say, I'm sorry, but this communication is becoming a little intense. I hope you don't mind that I am going to take a pause and come back to you in an hour. I hope you don't mind that. I'd like to think about what you just said and process the information you've just given me and come back to you. So that's one way to handle a confrontation. It may be more complex than that. You might need to get a manager involved. You might need to say, this situation is really very complex and I'm sorry, but this is not the right venue. I am going to have to ask someone else to come and mediate for us. So I hope that answered that question. Let me see if I have any other questions. Okay. How would you suggest we keep in touch with people we've had coffee chats with when I might not have an update? Okay. So one of the things that I have done and has worked in the past, if I've had a one-to-one or coffee chat with someone and it's an informational interview and I've now learned a little bit about this person. I know, for example, they are really passionate about AI. Let's just say it's AI. One of the ways I would keep in touch with this person is I would send them an article I've read about AI, send them an interesting article I found or a presentation that they might find interesting. So finding commonality, trying to solidify that relationship by emphasizing commonalities, the way I go about kind of doing continuous conversation. It could be that there was a news release. That's another situation. Maybe you saw a news release on the company and that prompted you to think about this person. So write them an email or a text and say, oh, I just saw the press release that you're opening up a company in a new market or you're launching a new product. Hey, that's fantastic. I'd love to hear more. So I hope I answered that question. Let me see. I have a couple of others that have come in. Okay. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here. So this one is, I'm curious about how to frame or present myself in a job search when I'm in a role that has very limited use of technology like Slack. Well, I would say it depends on the role. First of all, these tools are easy to learn. And unless it's specific to your job, which unless you're it's in a communications role, I would imagine that some familiarity would be useful in the role. I don't really think that it would be necessary to emphasize it unless it's very specific to your job. So if you are in a very technical role where it demands a technical know-how of specific platform or database or software, then obviously that's relevant and obviously you would bring that up. Obviously you wouldn't bring it up if you don't know how to do it. So I don't know if that answered your question. I hope that it did. Let's see. The last one is how to approach your boss and discuss making irrational decisions on recruitment for a high impact role. So basically you and your boss disagree. This is a very complex one. I think that I would start with asking yourself how important, well, there's a couple of ways I think of addressing this one. I think that I would talk to others, elicit feedback from other peers or people you trust to talk about the situation and first of all, to categorize how important is it? Is it really critical that I get agreement? And if the answer is yes, it's critical that I get agreement, then we have to think about, okay, how do I influence this person? How do I influence my boss? And what's the best way to influencing him? And I don't know if you know your boss well. If you know your boss well, you might already know the answer to this question about how this person gets influenced. Maybe you don't influence your boss and other people do. Maybe you go to the person that influences your boss the most and have a conversation with them and say to them, we're having this discussion about recruitment and I would love your feedback about how to get him on board. So that's a couple of ways that I think you could influence your boss. So that's more around influencing skills and using others to influence when you can't do it directly. Great questions. Suggestions for getting into a conversation when one or two people are dominating the conversation. Well, yeah. I think sometimes asking the person who's leading the presentation, I don't know if you're using Slack at that moment, and I don't know the scenario, but you could always Slack someone and say, hey, I'm trying to ask a question and I can't really get my question answered. If it's on Zoom, you might want to raise your hand, even if it's not common to raise your hand, so at least they know you're trying to get their attention. I think it depends on the environment and the culture, and but don't be shy. Do it politely, try to read the room, and do it politely. But I would definitely say, excuse me, raise your hand. I'm trying to, I'm very curious about getting this question answered, and you haven't touched on it. When job searching, would you recommend over communicating with recruiters and or hiring managers? I would say no. The answer to that question is definitely no. And the reason I say this is because recruiters are working on so many roles at the same time. They are really, their time is overspent. And I think that intermittent communication, but over communicating is not going to do anything to build your case. And it's not going to give you a higher probability of getting the job. You might get on someone's nerves if you're over communicating in all ways. So I would say in this case, less could be more. It also depends on the relationship you have with the recruiter or with the manager, but you also don't want to overly pester them. I think those are all my questions. Great questions. I really appreciate that you were interactive, and I really hope that there were some good tips here that you can take away and use in your everyday communications. Next month, we will be having our webinar on March 21st, and the webinar is on transferable skills for career reinvention. And that one again is on March 21st. I hope that you will join me, and hopefully it will be as interactive. So thank you so much for joining. I had a great time. I hope you took some tips that you'll be practicing. Thank you.